Do you think our era is cruel enough? Take a step back. History hides nightmares you can't even imagine, where torture was meticulously designed and the target was often women. These are not fairy tales. This is the naked truth. Do you dare to face what our ancestors did? Together, we will uncover the most horrific torture methods, the real nightmares that once existed. Spanish donkey. This tool dates back to the Middle Ages, and it was used to slowly and painfully cut a woman's body in half, starting from her genitals. It consisted of a pyramidal wedge with a sharp end. Women would be forced to ride its sharp end so that it would penetrate between their legs. And sometimes some weights were tied to her legs to force the sharp end of the peg to immerse deeper and faster into her vagina and start splitting her in two. Breast ripper. This was a tool consisting of two large symmetrical prongs, usually heated before use. Its main purpose was to tear the breasts of single mothers or cheating wives off their bodies. If the punishments above targeted bodily integrity, the next tools attacked their dignity and voice directly. Scold's bridle. For the medieval man, the simplest way to get his wife to stop constantly nagging him was to place her in a scold's bridle. Scold refers to a woman accused of excessive chatting, gossiping, or simply complaining too much. In that age, gossiping was feared to be the work of the devil. The first recorded use of the device goes back to the 16th century. The bridle was an iron mask locked over the head of a woman. Sometimes spikes would be inserted into the mouth and placed just above the tongue, making it impossible for the woman to speak without immense pain. However, it's argued that the torture of the scold's bridle was primarily psychological. The woman was publicly humiliated as she was shame-paraded through the town wearing the bridle while people cursed and spat at her, cutting the woman in half with a chainsaw. You like to play a game? Let's hang you upside down and start cutting you in half at the genitals. During the medieval ages, this technique of torture was used as a cost-effective approach to inflict the most amount of suffering for the least amount of work. All you needed was a two-person saw, strong pair of biceps, and a lack of a moral compass. Women convicted of witchcraft, adultery, or blasphemy were hung upside down with their legs spread wide. The creativity in inflicting pain seemed limitless, especially when it involved accused sins. The victim, being sawn, would usually be conscious as the saw ripped through their body because of all the blood that flowed to their head. The operation might take hours until the executioners finally cut through. Pear of Anguish. This name says it all. The Pear of Anguish, named for its resemblance to the fruit, was a cruel torture device used during medieval times. This metal fruit was divided into 4 petal-shaped segments that opened up when a corkscrew lever was turned. The primary victims for this evil fruit were women who were usually accused of witchcraft or had an abortion. The Pear of Anguish was inserted into their vagina and would be gradually cranked up, tearing apart the woman's reproductive organs. Some other uses of this instrument were torturing homosexuals, and it later was modified to be inserted into the mouth of individuals accused of heresy. Same concept, but instead of sexual organs, it expanded to destroy the jawbones of the victim. From mechanical tools, torture shifted to natural elements like fire and stone, turning the death sentence into a public spectacle. Burning witches. Death by burning was a classic form of capital punishment reserved for women who were suspected of witchcraft, treason, and heresy. This was popular in England from the 15th through the 18th centuries. Lucky victims would have passed out due to smoke inhalation, but if they made it through, they would suffer an agonizing death. First, they would writhe in pain as their epidermis cracked open. Then the fire would burn through their fat. The only relief came when the fire damaged the nerves in the skin where the victim could no longer feel pain. Stoning to death. This punishment is considered one of the oldest and most primitive, where a deep, narrow hole is dug. The woman is then tied up and inserted into the ground up to her neck, exposing only her head. Then, a crown of male executioners throw rocks at her until she dies. Although this punishment was applied to both men and women, women still face this punishment to this day, as the punishment of stoning to death re-emerged in Iran in the 1982nd, and it was applied to women accused of sex outside marriage. Unfortunately, 15 countries still apply this brutal punishment, including Nigeria, Sudan, Pakistan, and others. Beyond death, the weaponization of sex and humiliation was also a common method of torture. Sexual torture and rape. Rape has been used as a method of torture against women throughout the ages, as it was used to extract information from detainees and prisoners. Amnesty International discovered that rape was routinely used on women as a means of getting them to confess their crimes in Mexican prisons. Republican marriage. Sounds lovely, but it's far from it. Imagine being stripped and tied to a naked man and then thrown in a river to drown. That is Republican marriage. This method of torture was used primarily on nuns during the Reign of Terror, during the French Revolutionary War. The pain came not only from immediate violence, but also from the anticipation of a slow death on meticulously designed tools. The iron chair. This chair was used for the first time during the medieval ages, where the victim was tied and forced to sit on this chair, covered with hundreds of sharp nails for long hours until she bled to death. And sometimes fire was lit under her so she could have the full torture experience. Catherine's wheel. It's a heinous punishment from medieval times. It was a large wagon wheel, usually covered in spikes. The unlucky victim would have their backs fastened to the device and then bludgeoned to death. More frightening than public punishments was the torture disguised in the name of culture and beauty. Foot binding. For 1,000 years into the late 20th century, the biggest beauty standard for women in China was the small feet, which is why families bandaged the feet of their young daughters to keep them from growing so that they could attract men from wealthy families. Where girls' toes were smashed and then bandaged using silk cloth. Girls were also forced to walk on their broken feet to break the metatarsals. The ideal length of the foot at the time was 9 centimeters, and the foot of this length was called the lotus flower, followed by the foot that did not exceed 12 centimeters long, which was called the silver lotus. Female circumcision. Despite its barbarism, it is still practiced by many around the world, with the World Health Organization estimating that more than 200 million girls today have undergone this distortion. The goal of circumcision is to discourage the girl's sexual desire, as this process is applied to girls who are younger than 15 years old, so that the girl's clitoris and sometimes the small lips are cut from their vagina with a sharp tool. And in many cases, this process causes complications and infections, which ends with the girls either dying or being severely injured.
Please, no!
History is over, but the scars remain. What we have just explored are not just horror stories for entertainment. They are a cold reminder of the cruelty that humans, in the name of law, religion, or even culture, can inflict on their fellow beings. From the breast ripper to the lotus foot, all stemmed from a desire to control the female body and spirit. This is the darkness of history, and we are forced to look at it, not to judge, but to understand, and to ensure that these nightmares are never allowed to be repeated in any form. Thank you for joining Medieval Spirits on this dark journey. Don't forget to leave your thoughts below, and if you want to continue exploring the hidden corners of history, please subscribe.